Hello everyone, welcome to Habib Talks. This is Yousuf Kerai, your host, and we have a very prolific and renowned author and guest with us today, Dr. Alexander Key. Folks, Dr. Alexander Key is the Associate Professor of Arabic and Comparative Literature at Stanford University. He's also the Director of Undergraduate Studies in Comparative Literature and the Director of the Stanford Humanities Core. So Alexander, welcome.
Thank you.
Recently you have published a book called The Language Between God and the Poets. So can you tell us a little bit about this book and what inspired you to write this work?
Yeah, thank you. It's always one's favorite question to be asked about one's book, so I'm excited to talk about it. And I should tell the audience that it's available for free download online.
Yes, it is open source, so that's a definite plus here.
That said, it is rather technical, and it represents my investigation over a number of years into a particular moment in Arabic, Islamic intellectual history when people were developing very sophisticated accounts of how language worked. Mm-hmm. People were asking these questions about how do the sounds that come out of our mouths match up with the physical things in the world, and most importantly, how do they match up with the ideas in our minds? Can we use one word for two ideas? How can we be sure what words mean? And then the big question, and this is what I build towards in the book through a discussion of dictionaries and a discussion of theology and a discussion of philosophy and logic, it's like, why is some language so much more beautiful than other language? Mm-hmm. What is it that makes it good?
Right. And I wondered if you came upon any kind of musical discourse, because I think it has a lot to do with inflections and rhythm that kind of determine these things.
Yeah, I mean, what's fascinating here, and I should say, musical discourse I'm not really qualified to think about, though I am learning the piano as an adult learner.
Right.
My daughter's learning the piano and I'm learning alongside her.
Right.
But a few months of jazz piano is not equipping me to answer a question like that. I would say that what's interesting about the you could say the scientific, philosophical discourse that these scholars developed is that it thought about beauty in language purely in terms of grammar and syntax and imagery, not in terms of rhythm. A colleague of mine recently wrote a book about rhythm, and this was really a theory of language and beauty and poetry that didn't use rhythm. It's incredible how it was about the quality of the imaginary pictures in your mind.
Beautiful.
That's what it was about, not so much about the embodiment or the physical embodiment of language. It was about the cognitive, conceptual, but not in a dry way, in a wildly kind of exciting way. There's all that ideas in the head.
Beautiful. Well, all language is abstraction to some degree, and then it's how do you take the visual and the physical world and make it into, it's essentially something phonetic, right? And just audio, right? How do you represent it?
Yeah.
So this is fascinating. So you've been at Habib University for a few days now, and I'd like to glean from you your first impressions, and also with some of the conversations that you've had, what has been your experience so far?
I mean, it's been a great experience. It's been very exciting. What brought me to Habib really was the really exciting and innovative and intellectually confident programming you have for undergraduates. Like this, the Habib Liberal Core, I think represents a vision for what an undergraduate education can be in a particular place. So it's a vision for undergraduate education in Pakistan in the 21st century that's kind of inspirational for people like me who are trying to think about what's an appropriate or an inspiring intellectual vision for undergraduate education in California in the 21st century.
Right.
These are different places, but one can always learn from how other people are building their undergraduate programming and how they're imagining their undergraduate programming. So it's been super exciting to talk to lots of different faculty members, to talk to the administration, the academic leadership. Yeah, it's been great. I'm learning a great deal.
All right. And given, I mean, you may have a little bit of context about the crises that befall Pakistan continuously, and especially in the wake of the pandemic recently. But even beyond that, the political, social, cultural, developmental crises that have really afflicted this country for many years now and have stunted intellectual growth on any level. Habib comes with this idea of a liberal arts education model. And my question to you is that given that context of all of these crises and the dire needs of a nation, where do you see this kind of almost bold move to try and bring in an institution of higher education with this emphasis on interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinary learning?
It's a great question. I think the way I would look at it is to say that we tend to recognize when we look to our, I don't want to say senior leaders, implying that all our leaders are old, although that is of course hilariously the case in the United States of America at the moment. But we're kind of comfortable with CEOs or political leaders and we expect them to demonstrate an ability to do work in multiple areas. Like, we would be concerned if our political leader or if the CEO of a company could only command a very narrow skill set. I think we associate leadership, and I think we associate the ability to inspire people, which is part of leadership, whether you're a CEO or a politician, or you're running a non-profit, or you're running a university, or you're a teacher. Like, I think we associate that mature ability to inspire with an ability to inspire in multiple different areas and to talk to multiple different audiences.
So true. Yeah.
And so I think we get it at that level, but somehow, and this is very true in America, like I'm not qualified to talk about Pakistan as well as I am California. We somehow think that when you're in your 20s, you should be specialized. Like, no, when you're an undergraduate, you should be specialized, and when you get your first job, you should be specialized. And then we just kind of hope that people will broaden out if they're going to take leadership positions. So I think what the liberal arts model offers is really a way of doing that. And I think that different societies at different points have thought that the next generation needs to have a diverse skill set, an ability to work in multiple areas. So I think, and I don't think this is specific to, and speaking, as someone who cares about history,
Right.
I don't think this belief that what the next generation of our society needs is a diverse skill set. That's not unique to North America. That's not unique to the liberal arts model. You think of, from my research, you think of the classical Arabic concept of adab. It's the same thing.
Yes.
It's a pedagogical commitment to saying that the next generation, in order to succeed, needs a diverse skill set. Now, the North American late 20th century iteration of adab is called liberal arts.
Liberal arts.
And I think, Habib is it's not that Habib is like copying that North American iteration, it's that Habib is in this position to say, we in Pakistan in the 21st century have got an innovative new approach to that next generation question. It's a version of adab, it's a version of liberal arts.
There has been, now that you mention it, I mean, this idea of adab, in our region as well. I mean, it has many facets, and from cultural concerns, historical concerns, words like traditional and even classical, sometimes they can relegate things to be outdated or somehow antithetical to progress. So I see the point you're making, that it is definitely, but I like that you're phrasing it in the context of leadership as well. That we often don't think about what we want to look for in our leaders, and one of the first things that I would think is empathy. I mean, yes, a diversity of skill set for sure, but you can only address concerns if you're concerned about them. So I think, and so empathetic leadership would definitely be something that a liberal arts model can aspire towards, at least. Now, you've kind of looked at the curriculum of this new major that we are offering at Habib called Comparative Humanities. And so, bold move upon bold move, there is this major that can get criticized as being, something that may not necessarily equip, young people with the ability to go out into the world and be able to secure themselves a livelihood, or what have you. What is your take on kind of a major that's targeting intellectual concerns primarily, right? In this context of Pakistan.
I mean, I'm a great admirer of the comparative humanities program, and my colleague Mohammed Harris is a dear colleague whose work I've got a great deal of time for, and he's somebody who loves Plato. This is and if you look at Plato was just as concerned with this, how do we educate the next generation? It was one of his primary concerns was how do we educate the next generation. And so if you think, there's no sense in which Plato is more Western than he is South Asian. That makes no sense. Plato is probably more South Asian than he is Western. So to have a program in comparative humanities run by a Platonist in 21st century Pakistan is, I think, kind of the perfect example of how it's a future-oriented program about how best to create the next generation of leaders who are able to contribute to solving the problems. And the other thing that I would say is that when you talked about empathy, and you talked about the comparative humanities program being intellectual, I mean, I would kind of say that the comparative humanities program is a practical vocational training that enables you to have empathy, which is a key interpersonal skill, and it enables you to do this through the reading of books. Right. There's no better way to think about how human beings are and how they operate and what makes human beings tick than reading about what other human beings have done throughout history. And there's no better way to be an effective communicator and a leader, and communication is the key to leadership, than being the kind of person who knows how to interact with people.
Absolutely, I think well said. And often we try to think of intellectual concerns as something that's impractical, and really there shouldn't be that kind of a dichotomy between the two. Very, very interesting. Habib University has recently, you know, laid a very, very heavy emphasis on pedagogical excellence. You know, we have a Center for Pedagogical Excellence, and they are continuously trying to make faculty more aware of strategies, of ideas, and create much more discourse around, you know, the concerns of the classroom. So, do you think that maybe, I mean, given that we've already, the first bold step is liberal arts education, and now you're, you know, over ambitious, maybe to also try to address pedagogical concerns, which in, you know, in a country where some of the largest number of undergraduate institutions exist, is also still something that is not necessarily a big priority. So how would you kind of put this move by Habib University into perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the sort of the history or context I would provide from the decade I've spent teaching in America, and I grew up in England, but I've been living in America for the last 10 years, the feeling that there's a certain downgrading of pedagogy, I think, comes from professionalization of academia and a choice in that professionalization process to privilege publication output. And what this does to people, particularly early in their careers at particular kinds of institutions, is it makes them put less effort into teaching because they have to professionalize and they have to get their publications out. Then I think really that's just sort of a little North American tangent to the liberal arts experience, that downgrading of pedagogy. Because again, I think when you come back to the conversation that we've been having and the things we've been talking about, there's no escape from pedagogy, and I mean that in a good way. Again, like Socrates, the classroom, the Socratic method, adab, the concept of adab, it's all about education and pedagogy. It's not about, you know, education exists as this interpersonal moment. If you think of the most inspiring teachers you had, they were inspiring teachers. It wasn't that they just gave you the book, you know, and you
often
walked away.
It's relational, right? It's a relational pedagogy that seems to make the whole experience work out. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, really for me, certainly as my career has gone on, the way I approach pedagogy is to say, you have to care about it, because if you don't care about it, there's no other way than getting the ideas out of your own head through the books into the heads of the students. Like that's the only game that's really the only game in town. That kind of communication, and that's at the core of all pedagogical theory. Like our learning outcomes, learning goals,
and that's why online education was so difficult, right? Because I think that that relationship building, you know, there's so many aspects to it. We recently did, you know, a small session at Habib on embodied learning, you know, and how you know we seem to, as Ken Robinson also puts it, that, you know, PhDs are an interesting creature because they often you know, they live up in their heads and slightly to one side, you know. So I think we forget that, you know, we have these bodies, and that plays a big role in not just, I mean, and I think it's beyond information dissemination. It's how do you build depth of engagement, right? So that that even if you cannot get somebody to necessarily love a discipline, but at least you can show them what there is to love. But you know, I mean, doctors are some of the people that spend the most amount of time in school. and but at the end of the day, you don't want them to have less empathy. You don't want them to have a lesser understanding of the kind of people that they're looking at or dealing with. And so I think liberal arts medical education is probably also equally important, and not just for some of the professions we see around us with like computer science and what we offer, electrical engineering, social development and policy, or communication and design, which is another very big field now, because so much of information is about how it's being presented to so many people at their fingertips, right, through the phones. Any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
One thing which again is a problem that we face at Stanford is that when we talk about the value of a liberal arts education, or when we talk about the value of a broad skill set, or we talk about, how can we recapture the kind of holistic, embodied, sense of education that ADAB, stands for, we forget that it's not just telling engineers that they need to read literature, it's telling lovers of poetry that they need to take some data science classes. And I think this often gets missed out of the discourse. And again,
the other way around.
Yeah, it happens as us.
Yes.
I look at my own undergraduate education in the British system, and the problem with it was that it wasn't a liberal arts education. It was specialized. I picked my major before I came in, and then took very, very little else the whole 4 years. What this means now is when I meet a colleague with a serious interest in mathematics, or when I co-teach a course with somebody who works on the history of algebra, I don't have the basic vocabulary or the conceptual understanding to engage with them on math. And that's because I stopped doing math when I was 16 years old.
You're absolutely right. We tend to think that, let's take all of these practical fields, right? These important vocationally trained souls, and let's make sure that they understand religion. Let's make sure that they understand humanities. But what about the other way around? There are so many facets to the way thought is evaluated, right? And it needs to have this idea of some deductive reasoning, some kind of logical thought processes, and I think that's also part of thought. And so I think you're absolutely right that an emphasis in the other direction is, and I think that's also a product of numbers. We see larger numbers especially in South Asian countries. You see there's a greater drive towards the math and science kind of degrees, and batch processing, churning out many more of these living calculators. But and so I think because of that, we're always in this position where, well, let's make sure that these folks also have that lighter side of life, that they can appreciate and have lives beyond. I mean, we forget that they're going to be, they will have families, and there will be things that have to occupy that time and space, and it's not going to be engineering or math at that point. So absolutely. Well, Alexander, it's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
Thank you so much for your time, and we hope to keep this conversation alive. Thank you all for being a wonderful audience.